Hi everyone, it's New Jersey Garden. Today I'm in the vegetable garden bed just doing some weeding. I'm in an enclosed space, but it's right into the ground. My husband helped me put some wood barrier around the edges so we could mow around it. And I'm going to be planting some cucumbers in here next week, along with some patty pan squash. Today I'm just putting in some marigolds. I'm putting Durango red and Durango orange. They're a French marigold, and marigolds attract beneficial insects into the garden, and so I'm going to be putting them around the edges of the garden bed so I don't step on them and so they don't get in the way of the vegetables. And then over here is the bok choy, which is doing a little better. The temperatures are finally warming up, so last year my bok choy bolted when it got really warm, so I'm hoping they don't bolt this year and they keep growing a little while longer. The lettuce hasn't really been doing much. It's been kind of sitting here for the last month. Really hasn't grown much, maybe because the soil is too compacted. We have slightly clay soil, and I did not have any compost at the time that I planted these. In fact, today was the first day I went into the garden center because I've been staying at home and I haven't been going out. But and over here is the Swiss chard. I have a little bit of eggshell around here just to deter slugs. But the Swiss chard is still really small, but it's doing okay. It's surviving. I think I just planted it when it was too small and it was too cold. We've really had some cold weather the last month, and now that the weather's turning warmer, I'm hoping the Swiss chard will do well for me. I have grown Swiss chard successfully before, so it's a pretty easy plant to grow. So right now I'm just going to be planting these orange and red marigolds around the edges of this vegetable bed. I planted the marigolds around the perimeter of the vegetable bed, basically around 3 out of the 4 sides. And I may be moving some of these around closer to the plants once I have more plants in here, but for now they're just placed around the edge. Also, to give you an update on the peas, they had gotten nibbled on by, I believe, a squirrel, like right when I first planted them in April, and they all got nibbled to the ground, and it took them a full month to recover. And I planted some new peas about 4 weeks ago, so there's a mixture of old and new pea seedlings in here. So they really have been growing okay. They're just pretty small still, but they're doing fine, and I'll have about 35 pea plants if they all keep growing. And they're just starting to attach onto the twine that I have here. They have little tendrils. I'm going to try to show you an example. Here's one. They have these tiny tendrils. I don't know if you can see, but they attach themselves onto the twine. And these are super sugar snap, so they're supposed to be able to handle the heat better than regular sugar snap peas. My next project is to move all of these Canterbury Bells into a couple spaces. I'm thinking about putting some in this garden bed where the violas are, where I planted violas a couple weeks ago, and maybe in one more spot. I put some of the Canterbury Bells in this garden bed here, which is right behind some daylilies that I have and some juniper. Then I put a little bit around this lily here. On both sides of this lily I put some Canterbury Bells. And then over on this side of the garden bed I planted some Canterbury Bells back here behind these lilies. This is usually where I plant some zinnias, and I will be planting some zinnias in the next couple weeks. And I finally got my lupines into the ground. This is by my mailbox where I have a clematis growing, and I hope to have some blooms in the next 2 weeks or so. I see a lot of blooms or buds forming on this plant, so I'm excited about that. The alyssum that I planted last week started to pop up, and then in this garden bed I planted the sweet William, and the roots were looking really tiny, and I had transplanted them once before from smaller containers into larger containers, and then I just transplanted these into the ground this morning, so I watered them in. I hope they do okay, and I really won't know until next spring because they're a biennial, so they won't bloom this year. I wanted to give an update as to what's going on with the cucumbers and the squash. So I planted 2 containers of cucumber seeds, and I planted them right before we got that frost, and luckily the seeds weren't damaged and they're popping up. These are the Ukrainian cucumbers. This container is the other cucumber variety, and it looks like I have just a couple seedlings in there. And then the patty pan squash, I've got 3 seedlings. And then today at the garden center, I saw some beautiful petunias and I couldn't resist. This is Madness Lavender Glow petunia. And then over here, I think this is a combination of Madness Lavender Glow and Moonlight Madness mix. Looks like it has some yellow and some purple. I think there was one other variety mixed in here, but I think I may have lost the tag already. Basically, I have grown petunia from seed. They're really tiny seeds and they take a really long time to develop. So it's almost not, for me, almost not worth growing them from seed. So I like buying my petunia, and they are a little bit of work. You do have to deadhead petunia and fertilize pretty heavily. And then in the middle of the summer, I've noticed sometimes the petunia can get looking really dried out and spent. So I just end up repotting my petunia midway through the summer to give it some fresh potting mix. And then over here, this is not looking so great. The lobelia almost died on me. I had a lot of lobelia that I wanted to plant last week, and I didn't get around to it, and it almost died in the basement. So I just potted it up in here, and hopefully it will do okay. I really do enjoy lobelia. So next week, when the cucumbers get a tiny bit bigger and the squash is a little bigger, I'll put them right into the garden. Today I'm going to be planting a couple herbs in the vegetable garden. I'm planting mammoth dill and borage. I have planted dill before. I love the look of dill. It gets really tall. And I did some research on these 2 herbs. I found a website talking about companion planting with herbs. And companion planting is when you plant your plants near each other for pollination and for pest control. And I'm just trying to learn a little more about companion planting with vegetables. But borage attracts bees and more than 100 beneficial insects. It repels tomato hornworm and cabbage worms. And according to this website that I found, and I'll post it below, a garden center website, the borage is good to plant with tomatoes, squash, and strawberries. Dill attracts the swallowtail butterflies. They eat the dill. And dill repels aphids, squash bugs, spider mites, cabbage lopper, and tomato hornworm. And it's good to plant with cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, corn, cucumber, lettuce, and onion. Apparently you shouldn't plant dill near carrots, sage, and tomatoes. And I'm not sure why. Maybe it has to do with something either with the soil, or maybe it attracts certain insects that aren't good for those crops. If anyone knows why you shouldn't plant dill near the tomatoes, sage, or carrots, I would love to know. And anyway, I'm going to plant this now in the vegetable garden. I'm going to plant the dill close to the cucumber, and I'll plant the borage closer to the beans. I'm with my daughter right now and we're planting beans in the vegetable garden.
I heard, yeah, and I know about worms. If you see, this is the bottom, very skinny. That's the end of it. And if it looks really like big right here, that means its brain is right there.
Wow, I didn't know that. Okay,
So
so we're planting pole beans today, two types. Carmenet, which is a purple bean that turns green when you cook them, and then emerit pole bean. And I've never grown beans before, so we have to dig them in an inch deep, and let's see how far apart. Saying 6 inches distance between the plants. So I will start digging now.
Hi, my name is Anne. I'm going to show you a worm that I found. I found 2 worms digging for the beans. Here's the 2 worms. I'm going to put them on a shovel now. Now I'm going to start digging. You see, I have a hole. How deep do you need me to go?
We need just to plant them 1 inch deep, so not too deep.
Is this good?
Yeah, we need to get underneath the mulch. So that's good. I have 2 different lilac shrubs. They're called Sensation Lilac, and they are really fragrant, and they have this purpley color with some white around the edges. And I'm disappointed to say that this year, this lilac shrub in front of the deck has to be moved. The 4 middle branches died off this winter. We had a really mild winter, so I'm not sure what happened, but I had to cut them out. So the whole plant looks a little funny now. There's not a lot of blooms on this plant this year. We'll go look at the other lilac shrub in a minute, but it's important to prune your lilac right after it blooms, because next year's blooms set right after these blooms fade. So you should always prune your lilac right after the blooms fade. So we'll go take a look at the other lilac shrub. This lilac shrub is more in the shade, so I usually don't get as many blooms on this one. And I pruned it last year for the first time because it was getting really big, and I only have this little cluster of lilacs here, so I'm not sure if maybe we needed a colder winter to produce more blooms or what happened, but I'm happy to get these blooms. They're really beautiful. Here's another shot of the lilac shrub from this angle. Last year this was completely covered in blooms, and I'll just link that video above if you want to see that video of the lilac shrub. We set up our hummingbird feeder a couple weeks ago, and we've already seen a hummingbird come to this feeder a few times. And I've read hummingbirds prefer to feed in like a slightly protected area, so they wouldn't want to go like in the middle of an open field. This is close to the house, and the hummingbirds have even come over to this feeder when I've been gardening, like right in this garden bed. I was weeding the other day, and I heard this humming sound, like a buzzing noise, and I looked up and the hummingbird was on the feeder. So years ago I didn't think hummingbirds came to this region, but I had some petunias and I saw a hummingbird on the petunias, and then I went out and bought this hummingbird feeder. I believe I got this at Lowe's or Home Depot, and I used this, I think you can just use sugar water, but I use this Perky Pet hummingbird nectar. It's basically sugar water with some preservative in it. And I try to change out the food, you know, once a week or so. And hopefully I can capture some video footage of the hummingbirds at the feeder to show you guys.